recording. Welcome everyone who is listening to the Solvable Mysteries Podcast. This is episode 38. My name is Juras. I'm joined by my co-host Glenn Highcove. How are you feeling, man? Is everything going swell for you?
Yeah, I mean it's the virus stuff. It's like in the past week, even just a lot has changed here, and the whole country is suddenly taking the virus really serious, and they're shutting down everything around me. So it'll be good to talk about something that's not the virus, and I'm ready to talk about some Munchausen Syndrome by proxy madness.
Oh yeah, this case is, I guess, gonna take our minds off the coronavirus situation for a little bit. Well, in that respect, where I'm from, in Lithuania, everything is also shut down. So, it's a time of uncertainty. So I'm definitely interested in seeing how this current virus situation develops. But today, we're going to be discussing something else. We're going to be talking about the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you could pretty much see her image right now. So this is Dee Dee Blanchard, but this is not her real name, right? Because during my research, I got a little bit messed up. Her real name was Claudine Piter, right? Am I spelling her last name right?
It's a good. Your guess is as good as mine. I would say either Peter or Petra, or it's Peter. Yeah, it's kind of a strange last name.
Let's refer to her as Claudine, or do you want to talk about refer to her as Dee Dee?
Let's call her Dee Dee, since
Right.
that seems to be her the name she went by.
So she made up this name, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a nickname. I think it's more like in the South, they really, especially in the South, they like their short nicknames. So I think that's probably where it came from.
Claudine and Dee Dee. I could see how that.
Yeah, y'all can call me Dee Dee.
Oh my god. Right. So Claudine, or let's call her Dee Dee, she was essentially found dead late on the night of June 14th, 2015, in Greene County, Missouri. No. Right. Yeah, so basically, yeah, my bad. So she basically was found dead, and basically because of multiple stab wounds, right? And the story is it's so weird because going into the explanation, people would assume that she is the victim here, but to come find out, she was actually doing some messed up stuff. So I guess before we get into the actual murder and all those interesting details, I think we should give a little bit of a background, right, into the whole case, since we're calling it the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. But just to get our audience up to date, this woman is probably not someone you should feel for, and she was actually probably getting what she deserved. At least a lot of people would assume, right?
Yeah, that was definitely my conclusion at the end of this. And it's funny because just getting ahead of at the start of this thing,
Yes.
You asked me earlier in the week, you asked me if I'd ever heard of it, and I don't know how I'd never heard of it, but for whatever reason,
I've heard of it, so
wow, yeah, it's I don't know how it didn't reach me in my little neck of the woods over here, but yeah, for some whatever reason it didn't pop up on my radar. But the more I read about it, the more kind of sickened I was by
this case is disturbing as hell. This case is so disturbing, even because I just knew the background of the story. Once I really got into the details, it just gets really, really disturbing. So right, Dee Dee Blanchard, let's talk a little bit about her and how she was brought up. So she was, as we mentioned earlier, she essentially was born Claudine Piter, or something like that in Check Bay, Louisiana, near the Gulf Coast in 1967, and she essentially grew up with her family nearby Golden Meadows, and Blanchard was the daughter of Claude Anthony Piter Sr. and Emma Louise Gisclair. She had 5 siblings. Now, I don't know much about like her siblings and whatnot, but she, from what I've gathered during her like younger ages, she was like already being quite deceptive back then, right? She was like this smirk on her face perfectly sums up who she was as a person, you know. Even on her like wedding day, she had that smirk. Right, so she.
Yeah. It's like it says here that during her childhood, relatives recalled her engaging in petty theft, and this is interesting because it's like, you know, I mean, little kids. As I was researching this, I did like a little search to see like what this means when kids steal, and you know, like I think probably all of us when we were like small children stole something, right? Yeah. I
like,
mean, that's
yeah, I stole something when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too. I remember. I think I can remember at least 3 times probably, between the ages of like, let's say 5 and maybe 7, where I stole something, and you know, you feel bad about it now, but I read now that actually it's actually a pretty normal set of behaviors for children that age. But specifically, what they cite here is that she often did so as retaliation when things did not go her way. So that's interesting because that kind of puts her in a different category of probably behavior. Yeah, exactly. It sounds like it was something that was more than just a little kid. I want this, I took it, and then, you know, it's more like because actual punishment power.
Oh yeah, because like when I used to steal when I was a kid, like I feel like I stole more stuff when I was a kid than the average kid would. You know, like shoplifting here and there, but nothing like too crazy. But it was always like in a sense that, you know, I want this stuff, I don't have the money for it right now, so, you know, like I'll just probably steal it because it was really easy. But, you know, obviously then you stop eventually doing that. But it was never like it was never to get revenge on anyone or anything like that. But Dee Dee was actually stealing stuff as like her form of revenge or something like that. So she was learning how to be manipulative and deceptive from a very early age. And, you know, like the funny thing is, like when I was trying to find more images of her, like I could not find a single image where she wasn't looking crazy or creepy like that, you know. Like she always seems like she's ready to do some messed up stuff, and it's like you always see like she's that crazy lady that you want to like have no business with, you know, or like you don't want to get her on her bad side, you know, because she's gonna start plotting against you. Like I get that feeling from just looking at her, right?
Isn't it? What it's kind of interesting because it's like it always feels like that kind of radar. It's like it's really bipolar. It's always like, you know, it's really binary. It's either like you really have that radar, or you have the complete opposite. And maybe sometimes I wonder if it's like people that come from families like that, where that either that was their main caregiver, or somebody in their family that they, you know, like a long time ago I heard this saying that like you learn to be abused from your family, or, you know, like it's not your enemies that teach you how to get abused. It's like often, so this is what I've noticed in my life too, is sometimes I'll know somebody who's continuously taken advantage of by people, and then it turns out, oh, well, it's because, like, you know, their mother, their father, or something like that had kind of conditioned them to be like that. So did you almost wonder, like, the kind of people, because it seems like a whole bunch of people were fooled by this lady. It almost makes you wonder if those people, like, their radar is just totally calibrated wrong.
I mean, if that is the case, then there's like a lot of people with those radars off, because it's baffling how many people she fooled. You know, we will discuss this shortly. She essentially managed to fool family members, extended family members, the whole neighborhood, multiple doctors, multiple healthcare establishments. Like, I feel like it's almost like she had like some sort of dark powers because it doesn't even seem like viable, like the stuff that she did. Like, I don't want to like disclose too many details right now because I still want to like have a structured podcast today. So I guess let's move along. So she was really messed up, or like, I don't know if it's fair to say if she was really messed up, but I guess growing up, she did some petty crimes, petty stuff here and there, and there's not that much information on her life before she turned 24, but at the age of 24, she got pregnant, right, with a 17-year-old man. Let me just see if I can find his picture right here. Right, so this man on the left side corner, his name is Rod Blanchard, and basically Dee Dee. Now I'm not certain. They got married as well, right?
Yeah, they so he was actually still in high school,
right?
And then he they conceived a child, and by the way, that's another sign of her kind of seeking a massive power imbalance. So it's not that usual. At least here in the U.S., it's not usually. If ever there's this much of an age difference between a couple, like where someone's in high school, it would be the opposite, where it would be like the man, kind of an older man taking advantage of a girl in high school. But this one, it's like she kind of found this seemingly kind of dumb guy that she took advantage of, and then he thought he was doing the right thing. It's the South, and they have sort of maybe more conservative ideas of how things should be, and they said, oh, let's get married. And then one day he woke up and he was like, oh, I got married for the wrong reasons, which it turns out he probably dodged a bullet. I mean, unfortunately not for his kid though, but yeah,
just in general, how he got involved with DEEDEE in the first place was like really odd to me. You're 17 and she's 24, and like it's interesting how that whole thing turned out, but they do end up having a child, and this child is the one that you are seeing in the middle. Obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, her name was Gypsy Rose. Now, the name is, just, I guess, falls right into place with all the other names that these characters had. Gypsy Rose. Gypsy was picked by DEEDEE because she just liked that name for some reason, maybe because she felt like a gypsy or something like that, like she was devious like that. And then Rod liked Guns and Roses or something like that, and that's why her second name was Rose. So her full name was Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And essentially from what we will find out, ever since Gypsy was 3 months old, her mother, DEEDEE, started treating her oddly, to say the least, right? She was, for some reason, convinced that she had all of these health problems, right? So, let's see here. Okay, so yeah, this is, by the way, Rod Blanchard. This is his, like, more recent pictures. But, yeah, so this is, like, pretty much how Gypsy was raised, right? So she was always dressed up in these like really fairy tale like costumes, and she was essentially throughout all of her life she was pretty much living like she had serious health conditions, but to come find out she actually was perfectly fine, right? So like, did she have any actual conditions? Because from my end of the research, like she literally was like perfectly fine the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things I found that was the most disturbing part about this case was not just the mother's behavior, where, I mean, there was just one thing after another where it started off where, and maybe I think this is probably part of the reason why she distanced herself from Rod. She made up some excuse later on, some false story that he had been abusing her, but clearly that wasn't the case. If anything, she was probably abusing him. But I mean, she's so from the start. She says, "Oh, the daughter's got sleep apnea, and takes all these. It's interesting with this age of like no health insurance for Americans. I'm not really sure how she was paying for all this, but she kept on doing all these hospital and doctor visits.
Right.
So they were going. It's they went to the hospital and they'd run these tests and never find anything, and then she would report more things. And I don't know if it was just that she wore these doctors down. And when I was talking with my wife about this earlier, I was like, you know what? I think part of the problem is that, especially here in the U.S., with the way doctors are incentivized, and it's actually an issue now where doctors are actually having a harder time making the kind of profits that they thought they would make when they went to medical school. So it may be different in your country, Juras, where doctors aren't necessarily guaranteed some kind of like super high standard of living. People become doctors here to become.
Yeah, well, it's not the same here. Like, people are not getting that much money. Like, it's not.
No.
It's not forced here.
Yeah, no. So here, for a while at least, it was kind of like a license to print money. So doctors.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. Doctors and dentists become doctors and dentists in this country because they essentially expect to become millionaires, and it cost a lot up front, also. So the fact is that the way it works, doctors are kind of incentivized to, especially if they're not that scrupulous, they're incentivized to push as many patients as they can through the system and bill. So it's like, oh, yep, diagnose. It's just kind of like rubber stamping sometimes. Bill, and bill the insurance. So
it makes
that's what I
perfect
almost.
sense.
Yeah, it almost seems like they just, oh well, that's what she said, and yeah, I mean it's really, it's worth kind of mentioning on the back end more about this, but yeah, so it looks like they kind of took her word for it, and then when Gypsy's a little older, she's riding on her grandfather's motorcycle, which I don't know why you would ever let anyone do that, and she suffers an abrasion to her knee, which suddenly, like, her mom is able to to put like surgeries on, and from then on Gypsy's in a wheelchair. But it seemed to be this it's really disturbing when you read it, because it's this ongoing slew of medical issues where she seems to have essentially put this child more and more under her control and restricted her movement, restricted her abilities, and then did things to change people's perception of her. So she started layering on other syndromes and things and said, oh, now she's got to use a wheelchair and use a walker. And then pretty soon, like she said, like, oh, she's got Hodgkin's lymphoma or something like that. Like, just a whole bunch of stuff.
She had to use what are they called? The feeding tubes that they stick inside your stomach. Right.
I mean, things that are far from being painless. And then, one of the most
perfectly healthy person. So.
Yeah, perfectly healthy person. There was never any evidence of this, and it was. Here's one of the things that really besides the feeding tube, and the wheelchair, and the shaving her head to make her look sick.
Damn, that's crazy.
Just so dehumanizing to a child, and then so one of the things that really bothered me was apparently she had been applying some kind of anesthetic to the kid's mouth to make her drool. So then they removed. Once again, I find this really amazing, because doctors are supposed to do this. You take this oath when you become a doctor to do no harm, and it really seems like doctors. Like I said, I think this is why the doctors were so quick to do all these unnecessary surgeries, because just from their perspective, they're like, oh, okay, whatever. We get the bill, the hospital gets money, I get paid, I get to buy that yacht. But meanwhile, like this girl lost all her teeth because she didn't have salivary glands anymore. Her teeth deteriorated, and she had to get. So like I don't even know. I don't. Yeah, they had to
really messed up.
Yeah, her whole dental work had to be replaced.
Yeah, damn.
With a bridge. It was really pretty ridiculous. But I think the other part, and I think out of all these doctors that saw her, there was only one doctor that at all kind of felt like maybe something was off and that there was some degree of fraud going on. But even he apparently was told by his colleagues to kind of just, rubber stamp it and let it go. It's not worth it. And he didn't. I think,
it's crazy just to think of it, like, because during all of those years that Gypsy Rose was growing up, she was allegedly had been to the doctors over 100 times. So how can you keep fooling these doctors? How is no one raising any suspicion, or if they are, why isn't anyone saying anything, is beyond me, but yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, she also, maybe this was the other, so besides kind of what I characterize at least as medical malpractice, and I think,
Yes.
if I were like, if there were any insurers involved, I mean, I don't know if Medicare was involved, so the Americans, like sort of the government's health insurance for people that are low income.
Had that back in the day? Because
well, no, we have it now. I mean, it's sort of, I don't really fully understand it, but it usually only applies for like senior citizens and then people maybe that are impoverished. And I guess they would definitely count as impoverished since she didn't seem to have a job, Dee Dee. But
oh yeah,
I mean, it seemed like medical fraud. I can't believe that it wasn't investigated sooner because, this is something that like insurance companies pay attention to.
I guess this just speaks to how, good at manipulating people Dee Dee was, Like,
yeah, I mean, it seems like she. I almost feel like she should have worked for the CIA or something. I mean, she not only did she
or for the
seem to be
Russians.
good at. Yeah, right. I mean, she kept changing. Maybe this is the other part of it. Is she kept changing her location, which maybe that assisted with it because there are like medical privacy laws that make it harder to share medical records without your permission.
Right.
So maybe that was how she was able to, especially by crossing state lines and going to different medical centers. This may have been the same laws that are supposed to protect your privacy here may have made it easier for her to exploit it. Now, I mean, she even forged birth certificates. So for a long time,
how do you even do that? I was thinking to myself, like, how do you even go about forging birth certificates?
In this day and age, that's what I'm saying. Like she, she missed her calling. She like tortured this poor girl and wasted all this time and money for everyone. She should have just gone to work for an intelligence agency. I mean, this was ridiculous. So yeah, Gypsy didn't even know how old she was. And then I think there's another interesting thing was apparently, this is what I said. I think just because it may sound like I'm getting emotional about it, but I have a real pet peeve. I mean, I'm sure everybody does, but I have a real problem with child abuse. And
oh yeah, and I feel like you're not alone in this regard.
yeah, I mean, for sure, right? But it's something when you have somebody who's a child and who's helpless or semi-helpless and dependent on a caregiver,
yeah,
and then the caregiver is doing something. And here's the thing: so it's something we didn't even mention on the front end is that before she was involved in Gypsy's life, before Gypsy was, or I think there was maybe a little bit of overlap, Dee Dee was actually accused by her family of potentially starving her own mother to death.
Jesus Christ! Yeah, that
so
was messed up.
So that's an interesting pattern, and that wasn't even. I don't even know if that was necessarily like later on when we kind of give a diagnosis of why Dee Dee did this. It doesn't even. I don't even know that she got attention for that, but her family strongly suspected her of having contributed to her own mother's death. And then later on, when she was caring for her stepmother, she was accused of putting Roundup in the stepmother's food and making her sick. And as soon as Dee Dee was out of the house and had moved, the stepmother was like miraculously better. So this was a interesting.
Oh my God, Dee Dee.
Yeah, like this person
a maniac.
So I mean, so it drives me a little crazy that this person was in charge of a child and was able to get I think this person she really took advantage of a lot of the laws and sentiments, and maybe this is somebody kind of in some ways taking advantage of some of the politically correct attitudes of like the 90s and 2000s, where everyone is so quick to believe any kind of story about abuse or, you know, hardship or conflict in her lives, and kind of like, well, whatever she says must be true because, you know, this woman with the single woman with the child would never lie about anything, and that's what it kind of feels like that. So yeah, I mean, so one of the things was that's interesting was she started depicting Gypsy as being kind of like mentally not all there, that like she was, you know, in some way mentally disabled or handicapped, and apparently she had like a little signaling system where she would actually like hold on to Gypsy's hand or arm, and
She's always holding on to her. Like from these pictures,
yeah,
we can see that she's always touching her, hugging her. It's almost like a way to impose, I guess, mastery over the other
yes,
person.
figuratively and literally. So figuratively in that, you know, it is like, yeah, it is like this. It's just she's, you know, Gypsy's almost like a little ventriloquist puppet that she's got there. She's kind of like, making her say and do whatever she wants. But then, like, she literally physically would pinch her and squeeze her if Gypsy at all started doing something that was not following the story. If you know what I mean. If
Right.
she started talking a little too intelligently, or, you know, seeming a little too able-bodied, suddenly, you know, squeeze, squeeze, pinch, pinch, shut up, and then, you know, that between that and sort of really, really gaslighting. So it's funny, gaslighting is kind of a popular term that's made a resurgence in the past couple of years because, you know, just
What does it mean
on the.
actually?
Oh, you've never heard it? So it's interesting. I
No.
had to kind of explain it to my wife recently too, because it's something that there was a movie years ago, like in the 40s. There was a movie, and it was called like The Gaslight or something like that. And anyways, what it was about was it was a movie about a lady whose husband was manipulating events to make her think like she was crazy. So he was doing things. She wasn't crazy. Something actually was going on, but the husband was part of this whole plot. Anyway, it's a whole subplot, but the whole plot was to
Resisting?
make.
Back
Yep,
in the day, right?
back in the day, yeah. So because there's a lot of controversy these days about whether like different news outlets or even just the way people talk to each other and kind of the political narrative, gaslighting has become a really loaded term. But taking the politics out of it, if you have somebody who you're telling lies to and portraying it like it is like the truth and distorting their view of reality, much as Dee Dee was distorting both her daughter's view of reality and also all these people around her, but especially the daughter. So the daughter, I think, gets some sense at some point, like, oh, wait a minute, I can walk. Like, I don't need to be in this wheelchair. Like, my hair seems to be growing fine. I don't think I have cancer. I don't know that I need a feeding tube. And the mom's kind of like, you know, gaslighting on one hand, where she's telling her like, oh, you know, you're actually this age and not that age. So she changed her birth certificate. So she makes her think she's 4 years younger than she is, which is amazing because that's a huge chunk of time. But
Right.
then I think the thing that really disturbed me was later on when Gypsy finally, I mean, amazingly starts to kind of gain some independence anyway, and is like starting to talk to people on the internet and starting to try to come out from under her mother's thumb. She tells her, hey, guess what? Well, one thing she does is when she discovers that her daughter is starting to have like potentially like romantic relationships or you know, relationships that she doesn't approve of, certainly, that she can't control through the laptop. She smashes a laptop and tells her that next time she's going to smash her child's hands. And I think that's really important to call that out
Fingers,
because
right? Yeah,
yeah,
that's insane.
that's
Well,
that's
how this whole situation escalated, right?
yeah,
I mean, Gypsy Rose. She actually met someone online, and she was chatting with that person, and decided to run away from home. And then within 4 hours from running away, Dee Dee managed to find the guy and Gypsy, you know, both somewhere in a different city or something like that within 4 hours. So, they
Once
just
again,
this Dee Dee
yeah,
was just like,
it's a crafty
she
character.
she looks a little bit like a cafeteria lady, but she's definitely she was definitely born to do. She was never going to be a normal person.
Yeah,
She looks like she could not really do much damage or like do deviant stuff, but like she was never going to be a normal person. That's the sort of thing that I'm getting from her. She was born to do this thing, this stuff. She was that wild.
yeah, she would have been a great commissar in the KGB. I mean,
Oh my god. Oh, she would be perfect. She would have
yeah.
been perfect for that job.
So that's a good case in point. So like, yeah, that. So I think that two things happen when that thing happens, and then she tries to re-exert control over Gypsy because this is like her little meal ticket and other things too. She seems to be getting more than just money out of it. It's not just about the money. It's about as we'll go into the medical syndrome. It's about power and sympathy and identity and ego. But she tells her she'll next time she's going to smash her hands. And then I think it's also important to point out that at this point she says that, hey, I've got paperwork on file with the authorities so that if you even try to question me, I'm just going to point to this and say, hey, you're not mentally competent. You can't listen. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
if somebody with Down syndrome or it was otherwise mentally
Mm-hmm.
incapacitated ran off and tried to assert their authority, depending on kind of the rule of the land, the law of the land, that person may or may not be able to actually assert their competence and their authority over themselves. It depends, of course, in the country, in the state, in the city, etc. But
Which is
yeah,
wild. It's a wild law. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should like not be judged by what some lawyer wrote about you. Because that's how she got
yeah,
those paperworks. Like, she contacted a lawyer, managed to manipulate this lawyer somehow once again, to just write, just have some sort of a paperwork write up on Gypsy that Gypsy is not mentally 100%. So yeah, I mean, she definitely was KGB like type of person. She really had everything covered, like literally every avenue covered. So essentially, Gypsy probably at this point started feeling like, there's no hope. Like, how would you feel in that position? Like, you have feeding tubes stuck inside your body, and you're getting like fed sleep medication. So so who knows, like, you're always like on some weird drugs. Like, even those like drugs probably messed her up, because allegedly she was on Xanax as well. So that probably really messed her up, made her like sleepy and question reality as a whole.
yeah. I mean, it's almost like she's a prisoner. So that's why I
It's like a
find.
hostage, more like.
Yeah. I mean, really, it is almost like like worse than the gaslighting movie that I mentioned in terms of like how she's
Oh
being
yeah, I feel like
treated. Yeah,
it's a lot worse, because
It-
at least these people right here, they don't seem like they were like sticking feeding tubes and then having like unnecessary
Xanax. Yeah,
surgeries, like. Right. So another thing you mentioned earlier, like this one little quirk in the story that I wanted to cover, before I forget. Like, how did no one question the fact that Dee Dee was always shaving her head? Like, she had no medical records of chemotherapy, so it would not make sense for her to have a shaved head if she's not doing chemo. And none of these doctors looked through the case and like just assumed she was going through chemotherapy or something like that. Or
yeah, yeah.
I don't even think that Dee Dee was portraying her as someone who had cancer. So
It was disturbing, and
what?
then but then it worked perfectly because we haven't even mentioned all the charities that she took advantage of. I mean, she even took advantage of Habitat for Humanity. She took advantage of like kind of all these things that they do usually for like, children that are in the last stages of life, where it's like kind of Make-A-Wish Foundation kind of stuff.
That's slimy, like Kickstarters and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
But it's like the perfect like disguise for getting not just those charities and the money and all the attention. I think was especially what was, because they got all these special trips and like benefits.
Yeah.
But then also for just the random normal run-of-the-mill people that apparently Dee Dee had like a big community standing. Wherever she went, she would kind of make this big show of like doing nice things for the neighborhood kids and kind of inserting herself socially into everything. And then I think that was like a big part of it, was like, oh, look at this lady with her poor sick kid, and the kid's head. Look at the kid's hair. She's on chemo or something, right? So that almost seems like it's like everyone always rationalizes, because you don't ever want to think the worst.
Yeah.
Everyone always rationalizes that somebody with their hair like that they're sick for sure, right?
You don't want to ask questions, right? You don't want to ask questions, but
exactly.
Like if I was a doctor, though, I'd be asking questions. But
yeah,
I guess that's just how messed up the U.S. medical system is. That it's all about money, and really, it's like it's more of a business than a public service, So
yeah.
So it is what it is. So essentially they move into Springfield, Arkansas eventually, because they were living in Louisiana prior to this, and also they were hit by Hurricane Katrina, which is wild, right? Or like somewhere around.
Yeah, yet another sob story for her to layer on. This already.
It's like perfect. It was perfect for her. So they move into this house right here, and it's actually government paid, so they didn't really pay anything for this. The government essentially gave them this house. And
Habitat for Humanity, I think.
Yeah, I'm not certain, but like, you can see like the ramp here was made for like a wheelchair and stuff like that. So that's definitely interesting. Now some other people are living in this house, as we can see. But yeah, so this is essentially where all the crazy and deadly events unfolded. So I think we should move into the really dark stuff. So as Gypsy Rose starts getting older and older, she essentially, starts getting more and more freedom in her personal life. So she begins chatting with a whole bunch of people online, somehow secretly away from her mother. So, she managed to do that because she was not telling her mother that she was having these online conversations. And one of the conversations was with Nick Godejohn on some Christian dating website, something like that. And they started talking, and a few days into the conversation, they essentially become start a relationship officially, or like online, where you like change your profile status or something like that. So for a while they do that, and I'm just gonna try to find a picture of Nick. Oh, we're moving a little bit too fast. Right, so this is Nick Godejohn. This is the guy who Gypsy was speaking with prior to all of the things that went down. And essentially their plan was to meet at a movie theater, so but to make it seem that they met for the first time, so that DEEDEE would not get suspicious. But they didn't really plan that well in advance, because the movie they chose to watch was some Cinderella Disney movie. And this guy, essentially, I'm not sure how old he was, but he was like I feel like definitely too old for Disney Cinderella movies at that point, went to the movie by himself and just sat next to Gypsy, and they were like, hey, you like this movie or something like that, and they started this weird conversation. So for someone like Dee Dee, who is an expert manipulator, an expert, people's person, or like understanding people, this caused like probably so many red flags right off the
Oh
bat.
yeah.
Right. And then they allegedly, now I'm not sure how credible this is, but they allegedly go to the bathroom and actually have sex. So this was all super weird. Like, how do they even manage to do that during the movie scene in the bathroom? Like, I'm just like, getting this how they managed to do this. Like, you have Dee Dee Blanchard, who's essentially always holding her hand, hugging her, or like, having her like complete control over her, and now she manages to get to the bathroom with this guy and have sex. So it had to be at least for like, some period of time where it's like probably longer than the usual trip to the bathroom. So it's like, it's hard to connect the dots here, but there's a lot of things it's hard to connect here. But yeah, any thoughts on that whole situation on your end?
The only thing I can think of is, yeah, it's very, now that you explain it, it is kind of mind-blowing. I mean, the only thing I can think of is she had figured out a way to be as devious as her mother in terms of getting what she wanted, and yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird first date, that's for sure.
I mean, yeah, but no, this was already Arkansas, so I would have said that maybe this is how dates go in like Louisiana for say. I don't know, but like,
No,
probably not. But
I mean, maybe for a certain level of poverty, but yeah, no, I mean, maybe it speaks to a couple things. I mean, I think later on we kind of think that potentially he had some mental issues going on, but certainly, I mean,
I feel like he has, yeah.
Yeah, Gypsy was certainly, I think,
learning the trade from her mother. You could almost put it that way.
Yeah, and maybe essentially really was like desperate in terms, like literally desperate, because her opportunities for any kind of interaction outside of that, afforded to her by her mother were pretty limited. So I guess between the chatting online and I guess you feel like you know that person, but it is interesting that the encounter.
Yeah.
She didn't really view it's fair to say that she didn't view the encounter super positive one. So I think in retrospect she regretted it, and she felt the guy was kind of weird and creepy, and I mean,
right.
It's hard to see how that would have gone positively for anybody anyway.
Right, but come to find out, she was actually also, you get the sense that she was using Nick Godejohn a little bit as well, because they always, during their online chats, they always had this plan B where they were planning to essentially kill Gypsy's mother, Dee Dee, but it was always, a plan B for them. At least that's what they stated. Now, I'm not sure how accurate that is, because they're probably trying to protect their own interests. So they're stating now, after the fact, after Dee Dee's dead, that killing her was always a plan B. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, as Gypsy explained, all of their other plans and options failed, so they moved in with plan B. Now this is crazy. How are your options all gone and all of your plans failed? Because that you have a father, Rod Blanchard, so you could probably just call him, right, and get everything sorted out. So, or just escape with like you did for the first time, and go live with essentially Nick's parents. I just really don't see the point of killing Dee Dee at this point. You just like, honestly, like, how much control can you have over one person? Like, you already managed to meet up in a cinema and essentially even have sex in the bathroom. You could have just, fled right then and there. So their explanation that their whole plans fell apart, and now this plan B of killing Dee Dee, is the only hope. I definitely don't buy it one bit. It was, from what I've gathered, a revenge thing for Gypsy.
That's interesting. I'll have to. I have a different take on it because I feel like. So I mean, a couple things. I mean, we haven't gotten to the trial yet, but
sure.
I mean, I would say, given the amount of control that Dee Dee had exerted over Gypsy, and potentially that this Nick guy, especially once they get in the trial, they make some allegations he's autistic and he may not have like clearly ordered thinking. They may not have
I feel like that was the case from my end of like the interviews that I've seen, and we might still be able to show some on this show as well, where Nick is talking. He doesn't seem like he's
it's like all there. Yeah. So I wonder if she had an outsized the amount of power she seemed to wield. Like I mean, in some ways she seems almost unstoppable. Like it's pretty strange to think of that now when you look at her and she looks in her pictures. She just looks like some kind of, like you said, some harmless cafeteria lady. But what she was able to do and the amount of lies she was able to tell, and then the way she was able to isolate Gypsy, I don't know. It's pretty interesting. Once we get through the trial and the sentencing, I have kind of a series of thoughts about comparing to that to some other cases. That are like with like battered spouses, where people have seemed to have gotten off a lot under somewhat similar circumstances.
Yeah,
have seemingly been treated much better by the justice system. So
I mean,
I have some thoughts about that.
Okay, so in terms of like that whole plan B, you feel like that was how Gypsy was feeling at the time, that she was, she was on a bunch of drugs, so her like perception of reality was definitely altered, to some extent. That's like not even questionable. I feel like, even like experts said that, all of those drugs really mess you up to like certain degree, but like to say that, there was no plan, I feel like you already have these like online conversations.
Well, the issue I have was she was homeschooled the entire time, so she never had a chance to even, I would say, compare notes. So like, I think of like my daughter. My daughter goes to elementary school, and like her friends all have parents that are in different stages of their marriage or their relationship with their spouse or whoever the mother and father are. And I'm sure the kids kind of trade notes a little bit about kind of compare and contrast to how they're being raised. And I think like it's almost like this hostage Gypsy. I don't really know what her mental perceptions were of the outside world. I really start to wonder, like, the way she was sort of kept so close to Dee Dee. I don't totally trust her I don't trust how she views the outside world at this point, because she's almost like somebody in a cult.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where like everything's being filtered in and out.
Yeah, but then at the same time, like, all these years later, now she seems really normal.
Yeah, so in prison, isn't that funny? A couple of years in prison, being around, I mean, even dysfunctional people, but being in even a abnormal social environment still seems to have been way healthier than the first 18 years with Dee Dee.
Oh yeah. So essentially, regardless of she had a plan, other plans, and they actually did fail, or at least failed in her head. Another thing to cover here is like Nick Godejohn. Like, if he's not in this situation, he's living like a somewhat of a normal life. He probably can have a better perception of reality and how you should handle these types of situations. Why this just proved that he was actually crazy, like Nick was crazy.
Yeah.
Like there's no doubt about that, at least for me personally. So how everything goes down later on, Gypsy essentially messages to Nick that I believe the message was, I'm ready. I'm really ready. Let's do this. Something along those lines. And then Nick sort of was like, okay, I'm buying a ticket to Springfield and let's do it. And essentially, one night, DEEDEE goes to bed a little earlier than usual for some reason. And on the same night, Nick Godejohn arrives to their home. Gypsy leaves the door open, leaves a knife, I believe, a kitchen knife somewhere around the house for Nick to pick up. Then Nick sort of a few minutes prior to that orders Gypsy to go to the bathroom and cover her ears to like not hear what's going down. So she allegedly goes to the bathroom, she covers her ears, and all she could hear is DEEDEE being startled and then screaming, shouting for Gypsy to come and help her. And then soon after, the screaming is stopped. And that's pretty much when Nick Godejohn went with that kitchen knife to DEEDEE's bedroom and pretty much stabbed her to death. Now, I've seen the actual pictures of the murder scene and they were really grotesque. Now, I could not find like any real like the pictures that I've seen before online, because I don't know like how I managed to like lose track of where I saw them, but I don't think we could have shown them anyway. But this is just the crime scene, so you've seen a bunch of blood, and obviously the only body pictures we have is like of this DEEDEE's, I guess, left hand. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And by the way, if you see those nails, right, I believe Gypsy was painting these nails for DEEDEE on the same day. And
Wow.
and DEEDEE actually, and they had a big fight like prior to this whole murder of DEEDEE. So I feel like this could have escalated Gypsy's she definitely like the need to kill her mother. This may have escalated this big fight, but while she was painting her nails, they actually made up on the same day. And actually DEEDEE said, Gypsy, don't hurt me, something like that. Don't hurt me. Those were like her last words to Gypsy, like, don't hurt me. And then she went to bed. So yeah, that's really messed up to think about. But yeah, like this is a disturbing case. So yeah, so those nails are painted by Gypsy. So yeah. And then the what came next was even crazier to me, that they acted normal. Both Nick and Gypsy, they actually bought I assume like rented out a motel room. Then they took a bus drive, a bus to like Nick's parents' home, and they just were like staying at Nick's parents' place, because Nick had like this whole story that Gypsy was like homeless and stuff like that. So yeah, and no one really questioned anything too much.
They even mailed the murder weapon back to his house.
Oh yeah, and the parents, Nick's parents, they didn't open that mailbox. They were like, "Oh, you got mail." And they were like, "Oh yeah, don't open that mail. Yeah, that's
got
ours."
bloody mail.
Oh yeah. So yeah, obviously, eventually, things come up, and there's, before we move into the trial and I guess the closing point, and I guess our theories on more in-depth details, I want to show this one clip. Essentially, the detective's interview with Gypsy, and I have like this one interesting part set to show. So let me just play this, and then we can discuss what actually, our thoughts on the whole situation are.
Then I had to go to the hospital and get some medicine because I have a seizure disorder.
Okay.
That's what kind of knocked me out.
Busy day, huh?
It's kind of weird though. People seeing you in handcuffs, they give you this weird look, and I'm like, I didn't do anything. I'm like, okay, number one, I didn't kill nobody. I don't do drugs. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I didn't do nothing. I'm a good girl.
He'll get
See,
everything.
handcuffs.
Yeah.
Deceased, all right? Now, what I want to ask you, did you have involvement in this? Okay. Just,
No.
hang on, listen to me for just a second, okay? I want you to understand something, okay? Remember the snowball that we talked about? You remember the pencil that we talked about? I'm going to demonstrate something with a pencil here, okay? Look at me. Look at me for just a second, okay? Sometimes people are going along, you know how you got a pencil? You got the lead here and you got the eraser right here, right? You know what I'm talking about? You've seen a pencil, right? You've used a pencil before, right? Okay. Writing this stuff down. All of a sudden you make a mistake. Well, what do you do with that mistake?
Right, so that's pretty much, the video is like over 3 hours long, so we're not gonna show all of it, but yeah, that's essentially her first reactions. She just comes in like normal, acting like she knows nothing about what actually went down. Then the detective tells her that, your mother is deceased, she has been killed, and she's like really distorted, like she's in a lot of distress. And then literally like a few minutes down the line, she's now normal. So, that's messed up, but it was really obvious to the detectives that she had involvement,
Yeah, I mean, that makes you wonder where she learned that kind of
Right.
ability to emotionally deceive people. But yeah, so I mean, no surprise. She doesn't even her part of the case doesn't even go to the trial.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's literally all in the text messages. She also had a Facebook group where she said something along those lines. We killed that fat bee, and and then she's dead. Like I slashed her throat, something along those lines. So it was all in the proof was in the pudding.
Yeah, I mean, so like she ends up. I mean, it seems like she had a lawyer who was halfway decent, and they plea bargain her out, and then because she wasn't the actual one doing the stabbing, they get her to cooperate in the trial against Nick and to testify.
Right. So Nick gets life. Right. He doesn't get death sentence, but he gets life. And
Yeah.
Gypsy essentially, firstly, they tried to like get Gypsy for life or the death penalty, but then after reviewing the case and looking at all the details, I believe her sentence was death, 10 years in prison, and the parole is only viable after 85% of her sentence is done. So she's set to serve at a minimum of 8.5 years from my calculations.
Yeah. I wonder if they have. Sometimes it's weird. Sometimes even with those sentences, sometimes they still manage to get out early with good behavior. But then meanwhile, Nick got. During the trial, I didn't read a ton about the trial, but apparently they tried to argue that he had autism and
which he had, which I believe he had. I feel like he had some level
he
of
probably
that.
had. I think I'm after we talk about Dee Dee's mental issues, I want to return to the topic because I do feel like there was a potential miscarriage of justice. But yeah, he ended up getting life with no parole plus 25, which it's kind of a weird thing with U.S. law. Sometimes
it's like you get like 50 life sentences.
Yeah, they have this. Sometimes because it is like, I think sometimes it is because if one charge gets reversed or appealed successfully, that there's maybe still some other ways of keeping them in there. But yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. It is worth mentioning that this is like one of the only times I've ever said, when I read this, I had to read it again. I laughed a little bit because, sometimes like when stuff like this happens, unless the person's done, I think one of the criticisms in the society in the U.S. at least, and I've always felt like this, is you'll have somebody that does something really awful, and then their family is like, oh, he was always a good child, or this kind of, it's almost like it's actually a trope right now. It's like a meme that there's always. It always disgusts me. They'll have someone that does something really awful, and their family is always like, "Oh no, he's great, and he never would do that." This and it's like, you know what? Just admit
Shut
to it.
up.
Yeah, like we don't need you telling us what a good person this is when we have them on tape, killing 3 people or whatever disgusting thing they did. But yeah, in her case, oh no, not Dee Dee. Her family, who, like we said, had suspected her role in a whole bunch of other things, and I think we're disturbed about what was going on with Gypsy, and they may have been in some degree of denial, or maybe she was just really good at keeping them out of her life and kind of using these fake. I mean, she was slandering them too, frankly. If she was saying that, apparently she'd said, I read some other articles, she claimed that like her grandfather had burned her with cigarettes and all these other things that I don't think were ever substantiated, including saying that Rod, the father of her child, and I guess her ex-husband, had abused her, and I think it was far from the case. It's kind of funny, by the way, that when she discovered the relationship between Nick and Gypsy, she right away jumped on him about the age difference. And it's like, hey, lady, do you remember what you did with that high school student?
Like exactly.
Yeah, but her family said, oh no, we're glad she's dead. She deserved it. And
they were like, they didn't outright say, or at least I didn't see them like saying that they're outright happy with her being dead, but like one of the interviewers actually asked her stepmother, do you think that she got what she deserved? And she was like right immediately, like, yep. Yeah,
they wouldn't even and they thought, not only that, they thought that Gypsy had been punished as much as she needed to be, and none of them would pay for her funeral, or it says here, even pick up her ashes. And they ultimately flushed her ashes down the toilet. Wow.
Oh yeah.
So and then apparently the father was a little more circumspect, and he kind of, I don't know. I think this is once again, this is kind of this group of codependent people.
It's a bizarre area of the United States,
He said that he tried to make excuses for her and say that her problem was she started a web of lies and there was no escaping after, like almost kind of depicting it like she was the victim of her own initial lies and had to play along with it. But I think that's actually far from the truth. So
yeah, it feels like Inception a little bit, like all the lying, all the bull crap that's going around.
So I think that's actually a good transition to start talking about what people think was the actual mental issue with Dee Dee and why she did all of this. And this is interesting. So, spoiler alert, anybody that's ever seen Sixth Sense, the movie Sixth Sense, have you ever seen that movie, Russ?
Wait, is it who's starring that movie, by the way?
Oh gosh, Bruce Willis is in it.
Sixth Sense. I feel like, man, I'm not really sure. Let me just
sort of okay. Well, it used to be. It's a really. I mean, I'm probably dating myself, but for a while, right around the turn of the century, it was really famous.
I've seen it. Of course, I See Dead People. Of course,
I See Dead People. Yeah. So one of the scenes, there's a scene where the kid kind of reveals he's when he's sort of finally taking advantage of his gift and helping people, he helps show the family of a girl who died that the mom was secretly poisoning that girl, the girl that died, and that she was starting in on the next kid. And that's when people watch this movie, they're like, what the hell's going on here? Why would someone ever do that to their child? Oh, well, so it's an interesting thing. So they used to call it Munchausen Syndrome, Munchausen, depending how you want to say it. And Baron Munchausen was a famous, I think it was German or Austrian noble who used to tell these really crazy tall tales. So they named a syndrome after him, and now they call it factitious disorder, because I think probably calling it Munchausen Syndrome was a little wacky, but I still like to call it Munchausen Syndrome. So
I know this guy. Like I've read like a book or something. There's like a kid's
There's a
book.
movie actually. Where the guy from Monty Python, Terry Gilliam, did a great movie called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which I recommend to anybody.
Like I've read that book, book version of that. Yeah.
So the guy was famous, and they think that like he was known for telling these really crazy stories, but then they think in retrospect they think he was actually like doing satire, like it was kind of tongue in cheek. It was like. It wasn't. Well,
he was a noble. He didn't have any like responsibilities, Back in the day,
well,
he was like
apparently he did some fighting against the Turks in one of those wars, and then he
allegedly
sort of told
like you can't really believe anything this guy said, right?
Yeah, who knows, right?
Right.
Yeah, so he had a bunch of so I guess when there was kind of this idea of somebody who wanted to draw a lot of attention to themselves and make a lot of drama in their lives, there was a good name for it, but now they call it factitious
disorder imposed on self.
Yeah, so there's two of them. Yeah, there's the one where you fake your own illness or make yourself sick or make it seem like you're sick, and there's this whole series of like faking medical tests and doing like unnecessary tests and risky surgeries and things and doctors' visits, and once again there's a lot of like manipulation and control over the truth. And then there's, I think, the more devious version, which it's one thing to do that to yourself and to pretend that you have cancer, or that's happened before. They've caught people doing that. Sometimes It's been for it's. Here's the interesting thing is whether or not so the other version is what they used to call Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and the proxy by proxy meaning someone else. So someone in your care, you would like if it's your child is suddenly sick and having these problems, and then everyone feels sympathy for you as the devoted parent who is sacrificing all of their time and effort and has had this big misfortune. And what's interesting is they say that it's important to differentiate it in the official diagnosis. It's important to differentiate it versus someone who's just doing it for financial gain. Now there's been, especially with social media, it gets to be very easy for people like this to cast a really wide net and get a lot of attention. And there's some people that have only done it for financial gain. So there's been some famous cases where, someone claimed they had cancer and this whole thing, and they got like $100,000, and it's clearly they did it for the money. But in the case of these people, the money is not really the object. The money might be a side benefit, but it really is about getting, I think it's like building this identity and getting a lot of attention, and it falls into this weird cluster of disorder that interestingly intercepts with like things like passive aggressive behavior, like we saw with Dee Dee whether she was stealing things when she was a kid or poisoning her relatives.
Allegedly starving her mother to death,
Yeah. So
which is just as bad as what she did to the Gypsy. I feel like, obviously it was a shorter period of time, but when you think about it, it's just as bad.
Exerting control over someone else. So there's like this. It almost seems like with Dee Dee, there's this weird combination of like, I don't know if there's like exaltation and like abusing somebody or manipulating their lives, and
By the way, fun fact: when you Google Munchausen syndrome by proxy and you you filter the images, like these are the results. Like every other picture is like either from this case or a movie that's like that, is about this case. So That's another fun fact, that this is probably the best example of Munchausen syndrome by proxy,
It was one of the things that was interesting because the people that looked at the case, kind of the different doctors and legal experts, they said this is one of the only times they can ever find where the victim of the Munchausen syndrome by proxy actually killed the abuser.
Right.
So that's fascinating. And one of the doctors involved, sort of you wish he was a whistleblower, you wish he'd tried a little harder, but yeah, he had suspected that was what was going on, but unfortunately he didn't pursue it aggressively enough. There's been some criticism of him.
I feel like there should be like the least amount of criticism on him. He at least had the sense of realizing what's happening.
Trying, I guess, yeah. I mean, still, it's one of the many people that failed Gypsy. So yeah. I mean, it's pretty fascinating. So I know you and I we had a little bit of an initial difference of opinion over this. The one thing I'd like to compare this to is, and this is why I feel, just my own opinion, I feel like there was a big miscarriage of justice for both Gypsy and I would argue even Nick, and this is why. So there's been some cases here in the U.S. especially where there will be women who are in an abusive relationship with someone with a very controlling spouse or domestic partner who beats them and essentially almost murders them,
right?
And who they end up killing, but not in the moment of self-defense, but actually like kind of similar to this, a premeditated act afterwards. So it would have been one thing if a woman had shot her abusive husband when he was strangling her, but no, it'll be like a week later she'll come and she'll blow him away, and the argument, which in several cases, I think I would say that specifically the woman who's gotten away with, and I think maybe also rightfully so, is that, look, like I was in the mental place where this person was controlling my life. This person could have hunted me down later, which is true, because that is actually a substantial amount of, right, women,
no doubt,
women that are hunted down and killed by stalker boyfriends or husbands. But yeah, they have been able to use the excuse that this person who was controlling their lives and limiting their options, that the only way that they saw in kind of a moment of, insanity or maybe not insanity was to eliminate the person that was causing the problem. So that's where, when I look at this and I'm like, okay, seems like she got a fairly lenient jail sentence. And once again, like I think when you and I were talking about this earlier, you don't want to set a precedent that someone can get killed without penalty if it seems like there were other
avenues of solving the situation. I mean, makes sense, right? I mean,
I have to really wonder though at the mental competence of both of these people, even though, like you said, it does seem in hindsight like there were some other kind of obvious ways that they could have availed themselves of getting her out of the situation. Once again, I don't know that Nick got really great legal help, because I feel like he could have plea bargained for a much better sentence than this. I don't, especially if he had any kind of mental handicap, I don't feel like he was given a just I mean, compared to some of the things that people go to jail for and get much smaller sentences in this country, I look at this and I look at what happened. I don't know that justice was served, regardless of the optics of it. The person that was doing this, I mean, like I said, you and I keep laughing about it because it almost seems like Dee Dee was unstoppable. Like, what? How did she? It seemed like anything she wanted. Oh, free this, free that, change birth certificates, free surgeries. Like, how was she doing all this? She seems to have just been like this amazing
magic. It's like dark arts or something like that.
She sold her soul or something. What happened here? But I mean, it wasn't just her soul she sold. She sold her daughter's soul. I mean,
essentially, she turned like Gypsy into a monster, because essentially no, normal person would actually plot to kill your own mother, so she essentially turned into into a monster a little bit, but it's definitely not her fault, but she sort of got some bad traits from her mother, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just my, I don't feel bad at all what happened to Dee Dee. Like, I think if there was ever somebody, I rarely say this, but you know, like I think it was, especially when it comes to child abusers that do this, and someone might turn around, they might go, hey, look, you know, you guys said yourselves she had this mental syndrome, and yeah, I mean, it does really make you wonder, like, what were the roots of this? Like, because she came from a family with a lot of kids. Did she not get enough attention? Was she neglected? Was she abused? I mean, there isn't really
there could be something underlining the whole case where we just don't know, you know, what caused her to be like that, because her mother actually was similar, you know.
Yeah, even looked like her, right?
Yeah, like her mother
was like a clone of her mother.
Yeah, and her mother was like stealing, like we're talking about not Gypsy's mother, but like Dee Dee's mother. Dee Dee's mother was also like devious as well. She was going to like the laundromats and like stealing other people's clothes. So that's one of the things that she did. So, you know, it's like, I don't know, maybe she inherited this stuff, and then also maybe her mother treated her bad. That's why she, you know, allegedly starved her to death. So it's just a cycle of craziness, of chaos, and it's, you know, somehow in this family it has been passed down like for multiple generations, and who knows how Gypsy's life is going to turn out, but hopefully she's not gonna pass it down to, you know, her offsprings if she has any. So yeah,
to another generation. Yeah, I mean,
because it's this type of like craziness gene has gone on for like way too long in this family, I feel like.
Yeah, it's so strange, because when you look at like the Munchausen Syndrome, like the causes part of like any of the medical you know, entries, it's so broad, because it could be abuse, it could be neglect, but it could just be, it says like personality disorder, which is like, well, that's pretty broad. So, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, is it brain chemistry? Is it abuse? Is it neglect? Is it all the above? I mean, yeah, unfortunately, it seems like Dee Dee went to like all new heights of just disgusting child abuse in terms of like what she did to her child. And yeah, I mean, it almost makes you like not, I hate to say this, but like, I don't know that I would want Gypsy, as much as she's been cheated out of a normal life, I don't know that I would trust her to have children now, because, you know, between going to jail for murder and the childhood that she endured, I don't know that she has a good blueprint. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's, you know, the whole situation is just completely messed up, and, you know, I feel like we've covered pretty much the whole case. I mean, the only thing we haven't talked about is like, what's the future for Nick and Gypsy? Well, Nick is pretty much gonna most likely sit in jail for the rest of his life, and then in terms of Gypsy, you know, there were some recent pictures of Gypsy where she's like with Rod, her father, his like father's girlfriend or wife, and then she's standing to another man, so maybe she's like, I don't know, engaged or something like that. Like, I haven't really went that far into the case, into what's happening now per se, but it seems that she's going to be getting out of prison fairly soon, I assume. I mean, this case happened in 2015, so, you know, I feel like more than half of her sentence has been done at this point. So she's gonna be coming out of jail fairly soon. Now, you know, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see how her life turns out, and whether or not, you know, she's gonna have like media attention on her, like for the rest of her life, because of, you know, this case was really publicized widely. So we'll see what happens there. And yeah, pretty much on my end, I feel like we've covered everything. Any last thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I mean, you know, actually, now that you mention it, I just realized, I mean, just think, like, if it hadn't been for Dee Dee, I doubt that this Nick Godejohn guy would have would have done something like this, right? Dee Dee set up this whole string of like dominoes that fell that ends up with this person in such a weird state.
But at the same time, like Nick Godejohn, I feel like he would have been a threat to the society. Like anyone who's like, capable of actually just stabbing someone up like that, he's probably not the best person to have around, the society.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people like that where,
they could actually do it,
susceptible.
They could actually do that. So, but a lot of people go through their lives without doing anything like that. But having the capabilities to become cold-blooded killers, so that's scary when you think about it. Like you never know if your neighbor, could like do something like that, So yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, so this has been episode 34, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. We're going to be rolling out a new episode next week. So if you enjoyed the content, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave a comment down below on your own theories on what actually happened in this case. We're always interested in finding out what you guys think of these cases. The subscription numbers has been increasing. We're really glad more and more people are interested in our content, and we will surely keep posting more and more of these episodes. So for now, guys, stay safe and peace out.